The entire history of Rome explained. Quotes library. Intro. There has never been a civilization quite like Rome. Not before it, not after it. In over 2,000 years of recorded history, no empire has reached as far, lasted as long, or left such a permanent imprint on the architecture of human civilization. The roads you drive on, the laws that govern your life, the language that shaped every European tongue, the calendar you use to mark your days, Rome built the template for all of it. And yet, for all its grandeur, Rome was not born great. It was forged through blood, ambition, genius, betrayal, and an almost incomprehensible capacity for reinvention. This is the complete story of Rome. From a cluster of mud huts on 7 hills above a muddy river in central Italy, to the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever seen. From the assassination of Julius Caesar in the Roman Senate to the slow, agonizing collapse of the Western Empire. From the survival of its eastern half, the empire history calls Byzantium, all the way to the final fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD, when the last Roman emperor died sword in hand at the city walls, ending a civilization that had lasted, in one form or another, for over 2,000 years. This is not just history. This is the story of what human ambition looks like at its absolute peak, and what happens when the weight of greatness eventually becomes too heavy to carry. Sit down. This is going to take a while. And it is worth every moment. Chapter 1. The Birth of Rome. Legend, Hills, and the First Kings. Rome did not begin with marble temples and golden eagles. It began with shepherds, swamps, and a story so dramatic it sounds invented, because, in part, it was. The Romans traced their origins to a man named Romulus, who, according to legend, was the son of Mars, the god of war, and a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia. Romulus and his twin brother Remus were abandoned at birth, nursed by a she-wolf on the banks of the Tiber River, and raised by a shepherd. When they grew to manhood, the brothers decided to found a city. They quarreled over which of the 7 hills it should be built upon. Remus mocked Romulus by leaping over the shallow walls his brother had begun to build. Romulus killed him, and Rome was born in fratricide. This is the story the Romans told about themselves. It is worth pausing on that. They chose, as their founding myth, not a tale of peace or divine blessing but one of ambition, rivalry, and blood. As if they already knew, from the beginning, what kind of story they were in the traditional date of Rome's founding as 753 BC, and while modern archaeology confirms that settlements existed on the Palatine Hill from around this period, the city that would eventually rule the world began as something embarrassingly modest. Seven hills, a river crossing, tribes of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan peoples slowly merging into a single community under the rule of kings. Rome's first period, the regal period, lasted from 753 to 509 BC and was governed by 7 kings. The Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization to Rome's north, had an enormous influence during this period. They gave Rome its engineering traditions, religious practices, architectural ambitions, and even its alphabet. Without the Etruscans, Rome may never have had the cultural foundation from which it eventually launched its conquest of the world. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant whose son's assault on a noblewoman named Lucretia triggered a revolution. Lucretia told her father and husband what had happened, and then took her own life rather than live with the dishonor. The Roman aristocracy rose. The monarchy was abolished. And in 509 BC, Rome became a republic. Chapter 2. The Roman Republic, the system that changed the world. What the Romans invented when they abolished the monarchy was genuinely radical. Instead of a king, they created two consuls, elected annually, each with the power to veto the other. They created a senate of aristocrats to advise them. They built a complex system of checks and balances designed to prevent any single person from accumulating the kind of power that had made Tarquin so dangerous. It was not democracy in the Greek sense. Power rested primarily with the patrician class, the aristocracy, but it was something new under the sun. It was the idea that power could be shared, rotated, and constrained by law. The early republic spent its first centuries doing what Rome did best, fighting. The Italian peninsula was a patchwork of competing tribes and city-states, Samnites, Etruscans, Latins, Greeks in the south. One by one, through a combination of military conquest and strategic diplomacy, Rome brought them under its control. By 270 BC, Rome controlled virtually all of the Italian peninsula. It had done so not just by defeating its enemies but by offering something unusual: citizenship. Conquered peoples were often given rights, integrated into the Roman system, and made stakeholders in its survival. This was the secret weapon of republican expansion, the ability to absorb rather than merely dominate. But the Republic's greatest test came from the west. Carthage, a wealthy, powerful city-state on the northern coast of Africa, present-day Tunisia, had built a maritime empire that stretched across the western Mediterranean. The collision between Rome and Carthage produced one of the most dramatic military conflicts in all of ancient history, the Punic Wars. Chapter 3. Rome against Carthage, the wars that defined an empire. 3 wars, 1 century. The outcome of these conflicts would determine which civilization would shape the future of the Western world. The First Punic War began in 264 BC over control of Sicily. Rome had never been a naval power, its military genius had always been expressed on land. But the Romans looked at Carthage's fleet and did something extraordinary. They captured a single wrecked Carthaginian warship, reverse-engineered it, and within 60 days had built 130 copies. They then equipped these ships with a boarding device called the corvus, a spiked plank that could be dropped onto an enemy vessel, turning a sea battle into a land battle. "19 years of brutal conflict ended in 241 BC with Rome victorious and in control of Sicily, Rome's first province outside Italy. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, produced one of the most brilliant military commanders in history. Hannibal Barca of Carthage marched an army, complete with war elephants, over the Alps and into Italy. He spent 15 years on Italian soil, winning devastating victories at Tribia, Lake Trasimene, and most catastrophically at Cannae in 216 BC, where he encircled and destroyed a Roman army of approximately 80,000 men in a single afternoon. It remains one of the greatest tactical achievements in military history. Military academies still study it today. And yet Rome did not break. This is the most extraordinary thing about Rome during this period, its capacity to absorb catastrophic defeat and continue. The Senate refused to negotiate. Replacement armies were raised. Rome's allies, despite everything Hannibal offered them, largely refused to defect. A Roman general named Scipio took the war to Africa, and at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, defeated Hannibal on his own soil. Carthage surrendered and was stripped of its empire. The Third Punic War ended in 146 BC when a Roman army razed Carthage to the ground. According to legend, the Romans salted the earth so nothing would grow there again. Carthage was gone. Rome now ruled the Mediterranean world. And something in the Republic began to change. Chapter 4. The Crisis of the Republic. Wealth, Inequality, and the Road to Civil War. Victory had made Rome rich. It had also made Rome unstable. The conquest of the Mediterranean poured enormous wealth into Rome, but that wealth accumulated overwhelmingly in the hands of a small aristocratic class. Senators and wealthy landowners bought up land across Italy, using slave labor from conquered territories to work its small farmers, the backbone of the Roman army, returned from war to find their land bought out from under them. They flooded into Rome, landless and desperate, forming a volatile urban underclass. Two brothers tried to fix this. Tiberius Gracchus in 133 BC, and his brother Gaius a decade later, proposed land reform legislation that would redistribute public land to the poor. Both were killed by aristocratic mobs. Rome had demonstrated something disturbing. It was willing to murder its own reformers rather than accept structural change. The Republic was beginning to eat itself. Into this instability stepped a new kind of Roman political figure, the military strongman. Men like Marius and Sulla discovered that the loyalty of an army could be purchased with the promise of land and plunder. Suddenly legions were loyal not to the Republic but to their commanders. Sulla marched his army on Rome itself in 88 BC, the first time a Roman general had done such a thing, and seized power. The precedent was set. The generation that followed produced Julius Caesar, arguably the most consequential individual in the history of Western civilization. Caesar was a brilliant military commander who conquered Gaul over 9 years, adding enormous wealth and territory to Rome's empire. He was also a gifted politician, a brilliant writer, and a man who understood that the Republic's old structures were no longer capable of governing an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. When the Senate, fearing his power, ordered him to disband his army, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his legions in 49 BC, another act of treason that became another act of history. Civil war followed. Caesar defeated his rival Pompey. He became dictator. He reformed the calendar, restructured the debt system, extended citizenship, and rebuilt the city. He was everything Rome needed and everything the old guard feared. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators calling themselves the Liberators stabbed him 23 times on the floor of the Senate. They thought they were saving the Republic. They were, in fact, killing it. Chapter 5, The Fall of the Republic and the Rise of Augustus. Caesar's assassination did not restore the Republic. It plunged Rome into another round of savage civil war. His adopted heir, the 18-year-old Octavian, formed an uneasy alliance with Caesar's lieutenant Mark Antony and a general named Lepidus. Together they hunted down Caesar's killers, defeating them at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. Brutus and Cassius both died on the battlefield. With the liberators destroyed, the alliance collapsed. Antony, now the ruler of the eastern Mediterranean, formed both a political and romantic alliance with Cleopatra VII of Egypt, the last pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty, one of the most politically brilliant figures of the ancient world. Octavian, controlling the West, framed the coming conflict not as a Roman civil war but as a war against a foreign queen who had seduced a Roman general away from his duty. It was masterful propaganda. The decisive confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Octavian's admiral Agrippa destroyed Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. The two lovers fled to Egypt. Within a year, both were dead, Antony by his own sword, Cleopatra by means still debated. Egypt became a Roman province. Octavian stood alone as the master of the entire Roman world. He was 23 years old. Loudspeaker. Before we go further, if you are learning something from this video, subscribe to Quotes Library right now. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a video. This channel is dedicated to bringing history, wisdom, and philosophy to life in a way that stays with you. Subscribe now. It means more than you know. Chapter 6. The Roman Empire, Augustus in the Golden Age. Octavian was too clever to call himself king. He had seen what happened to Caesar. Instead, he dismantled the republic with breathtaking subtlety, preserving all its forms while emptying them of their substance. He kept the Senate, the consuls, the elections, but made sure that real power flowed through him. He took the title Augustus, the revered one, and called himself Princeps, first citizen. He was, in all but name, the first Roman emperor. And he was brilliant at it. Augustus ruled for 41 years, the longest reign of any Roman emperor, and used every one of them to rebuild Rome from the inside out. He famously said he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He reformed the army, creating a professional standing force with standardized terms of service and retirement benefits. He created the Praetorian Guard, the first permanent police force in Rome's history. He overhauled the tax system, rebuilt the road network, and inaugurated a golden age of Latin literature that produced Virgil, Horace, Ovid, and Livy. The century and a half that followed Augustus, through the emperors Tiberius, Claudius, Vespasian, Titus, Trajan, Hadrian, and the Antonines, represents the peak of Roman power. Under Trajan, who reigned from 98 to 117 AD, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Scotland in the northwest to Mesopotamia in the east, from the Rhine and Danube in the north to the Sahara Desert in the south. 60 to 70 million people lived within its borders. The Mediterranean was, in literal truth, a Roman lake. The philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who reigned from 161 to 180 AD, is often cited as the last great emperor of the High Empire. He spent most of his reign on military campaign, defending the empire's borders against the Germanic tribes pressing from the north. He never stopped writing his Meditations, the private philosophical journal that has outlasted every military victory he ever won. Chapter 7. The Crisis of the 3rd Century, when Rome almost died. What followed Marcus Aurelius was something Rome had not seen since the late Republic: chaos. His son Commodus, vain, cruel, and dangerously unstable, was assassinated in 192 AD, plunging Rome into civil war. The pattern that followed over the next century would become devastatingly familiar. The crisis of the 3rd century, from 235 to 284 AD, was 50 years of almost continuous catastrophe. In that period, Rome had over 50 emperors. The average reign lasted less than 2 years. Most emperors were assassinated by their own soldiers. The army, which had always been Rome's greatest strength, had become its most dangerous liability, a political force that sold the throne to the highest bidder. Simultaneously, the empire faced devastating external pressures. Germanic tribes, the Goths, the Alemanni, the Franks, broke through the Rhine-Danube frontier repeatedly. In the east, the old Parthian Empire had been replaced by the aggressive Sassanid Persian Empire. In 260 AD, the unthinkable happened. The Roman Emperor Valerian was captured in battle by the Persian king Shapur I, the only time in history a Roman emperor was taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. He died in captivity. The economy collapsed. The silver content of Roman coins was debased to near zero. Trade contracted. Cities shrank. Plagues swept through the empire repeatedly. Parts of the empire briefly broke away entirely. The Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east. For a terrifying moment, it looked as if Rome would simply fragment and disappear. It did not. A series of tough, capable soldier emperors, Claudius Gothicus, Aurelian, Probus, reunified the empire through sheer military force. By 284 AD, Rome had survived. But it would never be quite the same again. Chapter 8. Diocletian, Constantine, and the Transformation of Rome. The man who pulled Rome back from the edge was Diocletian, a soldier of genius from Dalmatia, present-day Croatia, who became emperor in 284 AD. He understood that a single man could no longer govern an empire of Rome's size effectively, and he created the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 co-emperors, 2 senior and 2 junior, each responsible for a different region of the empire. He doubled the size of the army. He reformed the taxation system. He restructured the bureaucracy. He issued price controls to combat inflation. He stabilized the empire through sheer administrative willpower. He also launched, in 303 AD, the last and most severe persecution of Christians in Roman history. Christianity had been spreading steadily through the empire for 3 centuries, drawing converts from every social class. Diocletian saw it as a threat to the traditional Roman order and tried to suppress it with fire and blood. He failed, and his successor did the opposite. Constantine I became the sole emperor of Rome in 324 AD after defeating his rivals in yet another civil war. He made the decision, one of the most consequential in world history, to convert to Christianity and extend imperial patronage to the church. Whether his conversion was genuine or political has been debated ever since. The result was not debatable. Within a century, the religion of a small Jewish sect from the eastern Mediterranean had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. The world had changed permanently. Constantine also made another world-altering decision. He moved the empire's capital east, to a small Greek city called Byzantium on the Bosphorus Strait, the narrow waterway between Europe and Asia. He rebuilt it on a grand scale and named it after himself, Constantinople. It would remain a capital city for over 1,000 years. Chapter 9. The Fall of the Western Empire, How Rome Died. After Constantine, the empire was permanently divided. His successors struggled to hold it together, but the pressures from beyond the borders were intensifying beyond Rome's capacity to manage. The Huns, a nomadic warrior people from the Central Asian steppe, arrived in Europe around 370 AD and began pushing Germanic tribes into Roman territory with terrifying force. The Visigoths, fleeing the Huns, crossed the Danube into Roman territory in 376 AD. Roman officials treated them brutally. They revolted, and at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, the Visigoths annihilated a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens, another catastrophic precedent. What followed was the systematic unraveling of the Western Empire. Germanic peoples, Visigoths, Vandals, Burgundians, Franks, Ostrogoths, flooded into the empire, settling its lands, serving in its armies, and gradually replacing its administration. The Rhine frontier collapsed in 406 AD when a massive coalition of Germanic peoples crossed the frozen river and spread across Gaul and Spain. In 410 AD, the Visigoth king Alaric sacked Rome itself, the first time the city had been taken by a foreign enemy in 800 years. The psychological shock to the Roman world was immense. The Western Empire spent its last decades as a political fiction, emperors who controlled nothing, armies composed entirely of the peoples they were supposedly defending against. In 455 AD, the Vandals sacked Rome again, more thoroughly. In 476 AD, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a boy named, with almost cruel irony, Romulus Augustulus, and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople with a note saying the West no longer needed an emperor. No one knew it at the time, but Rome had ended. Chapter 10. Byzantium, the Roman Empire that survived. Here is the fact that most people do not know, and that changes everything. Rome did not die in 476 AD. Half of it continued. The Eastern Roman Empire, which modern historians call Byzantium, though its citizens always called themselves Romans, survived for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of the West. It kept Roman law, Roman administration, Roman identity, and the Roman language. It was, in every meaningful sense, Rome, continuing. The greatest of the Byzantine emperors was Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 AD. Justinian was seized by an ambition that would have seemed natural to any Roman of the classical age, reconquering the lost western provinces. His general Belisarius, arguably the greatest military commander of the post-classical world, reconquered North Africa from the Vandals, Italy from the Ostrogoths, and parts of Spain from the Visigoths. For a brief, shining moment, the Mediterranean was almost a Roman lake again. Justinian also accomplished something that has shaped every legal system in the Western world to this day. He ordered the complete codification of Roman law, the Corpus Juris Civilis, a systematic compilation of over 1,000 years of Roman legal thought. Every European legal tradition, every concept of civil rights, property law, and contract law used in the modern Western world traces its ancestry to this document. But Justinian's wars exhausted the treasury. The plague of Justinian, the first recorded pandemic of bubonic plague, which arrived in 541 AD, killed millions. After Justinian, Byzantium contracted rather than expanded. The rise of Islam in the 7th century delivered enormous blows. The Arab conquest swept away Syria, Egypt, and North Africa permanently. The empire shrank but endured. Chapter 11. The Long Twilight, Byzantium under siege. For the next 8 centuries, Byzantium was essentially a civilization under permanent siege, and it survived through a combination of brilliant diplomacy, strategic geography, technological innovation, and sheer institutional resilience that remains one of the most impressive stories in human history. Constantinople itself was protected by the Theodosian walls, a system of triple land walls built in the 5th century that made the city virtually impregnable. Arab armies besieged it twice, in 674 and 717 AD, and were repelled both times, partly through the use of Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that burned on water and remains only partially understood to this day. The Bulgars, the Russians, the Pechenegs, the Normans, all came. None conquered Constantinople for 8 centuries. The Macedonian dynasty of the 9th and 10th centuries saw a remarkable revival, the Byzantine Renaissance, as the empire expanded back into the Balkans and Asia Minor. The Emperor Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, was perhaps the most formidable Byzantine military emperor, defeating the Bulgarian Empire so completely that he reportedly blinded 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners and sent them home led by guides with one eye, a psychological terror tactic that caused the Bulgarian king to die of shock. But by the 11th century, the internal rot had set in political instability, economic decline, and the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, where the Seljuk Turks captured the Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV and shattered the empire's Anatolian heartland, began the empire's terminal decline. The Crusades, which were partly inspired by Byzantine appeals for help, ended up doing enormous damage to Byzantium itself. The Fourth Crusade in 1204, one of history's most scandalous betrayals, resulted in the Crusaders sacking Constantinople themselves, establishing a Latin empire on Byzantine soil for 60 years. The empire was restored in 1261, but it was a shadow of what it had been. Its territory was a rump state. Its treasury was empty. Its army was a fraction of its former strength. It survived for another 2 centuries through the extraordinary skill of its diplomats and the stubborn loyalty of its people to a 1,000-year Roman identity. Chapter 12. The Final Fall. Constantinople, 1453 AD. The Ottoman Turks had been pressing against Byzantium for over a century when the young Sultan Mehmed II came to power in 1451 at the age of 19. He was brilliant, educated in classical history and military strategy, and consumed by a single ambition, to take Constantinople. He had grown up with it. He had studied it. He had reportedly slept with a copy of accounts of great conquerors under his pillow, dreaming of adding his name to their company. He spent 2 years preparing. He built a fortress on the Bosphorus to cut off Constantinople's supply lines. He commissioned Hungarian engineers to cast the largest cannon the world had ever seen, a bronze monster 60 feet long, capable of hurling a stone ball weighing over 1,000 pounds. He assembled an army of somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 men. Constantinople had a population of perhaps 50,000 and could muster fewer than 10,000 defenders. The siege began on April 6, 1453. For 53 days, the Great Theodosian Walls, which had protected the city for over 1,000 years, absorbed bombardment from Mehmed's guns. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI sent desperate appeals to the West for help. Almost none came. Venice and Genoa sent a handful of ships. The Pope sent prayers. On the night of May 28, the last Christian emperor of Rome held a final ceremony in the Hagia Sophia, the great church Justinian had built 9 centuries earlier, where soldiers and civilians wept and prayed together, knowing what dawn would bring. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, the Ottomans found a small gate left unlocked. They poured through. Emperor Constantine XI removed his royal insignia so he would not be taken prisoner, drew his sword, and charged into the Ottoman soldiers. He was never seen again. His body was never conclusively identified. Constantinople fell. The last Roman emperor died in battle. After 2,206 years, from the traditional founding of the city in 753 BC to the fall of Constantinople in 1453 AD, Rome was finally, irrevocably over. The legacy, what Rome left behind. Stand anywhere in the modern world and look carefully, and you will find Rome. The roads of Europe follow routes first cut by Roman engineers. The legal codes of France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Romania, and Latin America descend directly from Roman law. The English language carries the bones of Latin in thousands of words. The Catholic Church preserved the administrative structure of the Roman Empire and spread it across the world. The very concept of a Senate, of representative governance, of shared power, of law above persons, was a Roman gift to political philosophy. The calendar you use, the months named for Roman gods, the week structured around Roman planetary names, was organized by Julius Caesar and refined by Augustus. The architecture of government buildings, courthouses, and churches across the Western world echoes Roman design. The alphabet you are reading right now is Roman. Rome was not perfect. It was built on slavery, conquest, and the systematic exploitation of subject peoples. Its legacy includes those shadows as fully as it includes its achievements. To understand Rome honestly is to hold both truths simultaneously, the extraordinary and the terrible, without collapsing either. But the scale of what Rome built, and the endurance of what it left behind, places it in a category of its own. No civilization before or since has shaped the trajectory of human culture with such depth, such range, and such stubborn permanence. Closing. What Rome teaches us. Rome lasted because it could change. It moved from monarchy to republic to empire. It absorbed the cultures of the peoples it conquered. It shifted its religion, its capital, its language. Every time it appeared to be finished, it reinvented itself. And when it finally fell, truly fell, it was not because the outside world was too strong. It was because the internal will to hold together had exhausted itself. There is a lesson in that for every person, every institution, every civilization that wants to build something that lasts. Strength is not enough. Greatness is not enough. You must be willing to change, to absorb, to adapt, to hold together the people inside your walls with genuine care for their welfare. The moment any great structure, an empire, an organization, a life, begins to see its own people as obstacles rather than stakeholders, the end has quietly begun. Rome took 2,000 years to fall. It gave the world language, law, architecture, philosophy, and the very concept of civilization as a shared project. It produced Marcus Aurelius, Julius Caesar, Cicero, Hadrian, Justinian, and Constantine. It produced roads that are still walked on, aqueducts that still stand, literature that is still read, and ideas that still govern. It was, for all its violence and all its glory, the most remarkable human story ever told. And it is still telling it loudspeaker. If this video took you somewhere, if the story of Rome landed in a way that moved you, then subscribe to Quotes Library right now. This channel is dedicated to bringing the greatest stories, philosophies, and histories of human civilization to life in a way that stays with you long after the video ends. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who loves history. Every subscriber makes this community stronger, and we are just getting started.